Entertainment Design Show. My name is Kelsey Connolly, and I will be your host today as the last episode of Women's History Month for the Untitled Themed Entertainment Design Show. Normally, my role here is as a graphic designer or an assistant producer, but today I'll be spending this episode with all of you. And as you can tell at TETV, we love to stay connected with everyone in themed entertainment. So we'd love for all of you to like and subscribe on our YouTube channel, check us out on LinkedIn, and don't forget our social medias like TikTok and Instagram. And we recently discovered a new way to get connected with all of you, and that's through our new public Slack that just launched recently. On the Slack channel, we give everyone the opportunity to get connected not only with us, people at TETV, but with each other within the themed entertainment world. Whether you want to have a virtual coffee, you would like some recommendations on jobs or your resume or portfolio to be looked over, we really wanted to give all of you as many opportunities to help your careers grow. But today, we will be talking with a fantastic woman who's truly had a blooming career as a creative director and more recently into comics. So welcome, Jackie Ball.
Hello.
Hello.
I was doing a dramatic hair flip for you, Kelsey.
I loved it. It was great.
Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm very excited to be here on the Untitled Themed Design Show.
We're excited to have you.
Thank you.
Do you want to give us a bit of an overview before we get pretty nitpicky into previous projects?
Sure. I have been a theme park creative director for an amount of years that I can't remember exactly right now. I'd have to do some math, and I don't want to. And I've worked at a lot of varying companies throughout the industry in that time. I've worked on a lot of different IPs. Primarily, I've spent a lot of time with some Warner Brothers properties. I worked for Nickelodeon for a period of time in Nickelodeon Experience Design, and I kind of really like getting deep into IP stuff. So I have a lot of IP pedigree, I guess, because I'm a nerd and I remember stuff. So that tends to be where I shine and where I like to spend my time. And then also I do write comic books for Boom Studios. And I recently had my own book that came out that was theme park themed, which we can talk about later if we have time. But that's sort of like a separate story. That could be on the comic book show that you have sometime in the future.
Were your interest in IPs connected to why you became interested in themed entertainment?
Yes, absolutely. I think part of how I ended up in themed entertainment was kind of like a lot of people. I sort of stumbled upon it and wasn't really expecting. I certainly didn't go to school for it. There are very few of us in the industry who did. There are some, but a lot of us did not. But once I found a job out here, my first job was at Thinkwell on the what is now the Warner Brothers Abu Dhabi Park that recently just opened. I want to say 2019, but I was working on it in an earlier version of it back in 2008. And that obviously was a very IP heavy park with a lot of IPs that I was super familiar with. I wasn't a creative director at the time. Obviously, I was right out of college, so I was just hired on as a PA and then a coordinator in the creative department of that project. So I got to spend a lot of time with the creative folks on that, and so that was definitely what kind of solidified me actually wanting to pursue a career in this industry versus just kind of like getting my feet wet with my first job that is production of any kind, which is sort of what my thought was when I came out here. It was, I'll be, my degree is in English and creative writing, but I want to be able to be doing something that's more hands-on, that like kind of uses more parts of my brain. And I was finding that was very true with even the work I was being asked to do as a coordinator, but then also the work that I was seeing other people do in different positions as I started to learn them.
Most people didn't have the clearest direction into themed entertainment. So, what was that like for you to actually get your first job? Like, what were the steps before that happened?
So I was aware of Thinkwell's existence and that this was a career that existed because my uncle is a Thinkwell guy, and so I had sort of at one point mentioned that it sounded really cool. I knew about like the Jurassic Park Institute tour that they'd done a couple years prior to my graduating college that they had put on like right when I was starting college. And so I sort of thought like I want to be involved in movies, and that seems sort of movie adjacent. So if there's ever some kind of opportunity, would you let me know? And had just graduated from Kalamazoo College in Michigan, and I was living in Indiana and just kind of trying to decide what my next steps were. I was sort of at a point where I was like, oh, maybe I'll move to Chicago and I'll get my MFA in theater and try to like pursue an acting career. And if that doesn't work, I'll see what happens next. And around the same time that I was like going to sign a lease at a place in Chicago, I found out that Thinkwell was going to be bringing some interns and PAs on for this big project that then would potentially be, they like to hire out of who's on the project already. So if they were going to be staffing up with coordinators, that might be an opportunity. So I kind of had this soul searching moment and decided that like it was worth the risk to head out to California. I had some family out here, so it wasn't like I was choosing to just like completely uproot and go somewhere where I didn't know anybody. I also have a lot of friends in the animation industry, so I knew that there were people here. So for me, the job itself was a wild card, but like I knew I loved California, and I knew that I wanted to find a path in some kind of media entertainment production. And so I applied and got the internship. I honestly don't remember if it was an internship or if I was just a PA. It was long enough ago now that I can't recall. I think I was a PA for a month or so, and then they hired me on as a coordinator because apparently they liked me okay.
I can't see why they wouldn't. So, when did you graduate from college?
I graduated in 2007. Which we talked the other day about you having just graduated. And so you and I think, are kindred spirits in having graduated right before major economic recessions, which it's not the ideal time to start a career in themed entertainment, but it's also not an impossible time to start a career in themed entertainment. It's just there are some struggles attached to it for sure. But part of the reason that my first job was that Warner Brothers park that only just opened, as I mentioned, in 2019, was that in 2008, when I moved out here, I was working for maybe 6 months, and the project had already been underway for a period of time at that point. But then the economy tanked later in the year, and so the client decided to put the project on hold. And so that, because it was a big enough recession, it was one of those where it is an indefinite hold, and we had no real way of knowing when or if that was actually going to come back. And fortunately it did, and it's out there. But I was not involved at all in the later phases of actually getting the park built. But it was very cool to actually see it happen. I was very happy for some of my friends and for the folks at Thinkwell to actually to finally have been able to see this thing through that they've been working on for so long.
That must have been a very exciting time. When all of this is over, you better head over to that park.
Yeah, that is definitely on my list of places to go.
Since you graduated at a bad time, and a lot of people are graduating at a bad time right now, do you see a lot of similarities of what's happening in the market, or would you say it's pretty different considering the parks have closed?
I think definitely that is a bigger issue with long-term park projects. I'm also more cognizant of those things, I think, now than I was then. I was, brand new. I was also not, I was a person who really enjoyed theme parks, but I didn't really know. I think there are a lot of people who are actively pursuing careers in the industry who just who have their fingers on the pulse of it more than I did at the time. So I think there are certainly some similarities, but I would definitely suspect that it is more complicated at the moment, based on like you said, the parks being closed for a period of time, that's going to impact revenue and it's going to impact a lot of things going forward. But what I am hopeful for is that kind of before 2020 struck, there were a lot of really interesting, immersive, themed experiences happening that were on a smaller scale. Escape rooms were really ramping up in both demand and also quality. There are some really incredible ones that are out there. Pop-up experiences that kind of, I feel like the Instagram museum of like the Museum of Ice Cream kind of thing, but there were some experiences that were starting to be not only immersive visually, but also have more have a more kind of gamified component to them as well. I feel like, and immersive theater as well. So there was a lot of stuff starting to happen that obviously hurt very badly by the pandemic, but it's also the kind of thing that has a much shorter lead time. It's a more temporary build. So it's not the same kinds of huge front end investments that parks are. So my hope is that more of those types of experiences and events will start to come back more quickly so that that sort of thing will open up for people more. And then over time, as park jobs start to become more available again, that there will have been some work out there for folks, myself included. I want to work. I like working.
Do you have a favorite project you've worked on?
I have several favorites that I can't talk about at all, which is one of the downsides to having, to working in parks, which are there is so much time that goes into them, that even sometimes something goes out of your hands and you still can't talk about what is going on with it because it still isn't announced or because it's not built and you can't really risk talking about how IPs were used. My favorite project, I would say, that is out in the world was Bollywood Parks in Dubai. That was my first job as a creative director in 2013, I want to say, is when I started on that. And I was working with a lot of folks who I had met on 777, which was the Warner Brothers project, who I'd met there, and who I'd known for years, but hadn't had a chance to work with for, at that point, about 5 years. And so it was this room full of like really just fantastic creatives who I was excited to work with. We were kind of half and half. Half of us were the Bollywood Parks team, and the other half was the Motion Gate Parks team. So it was this fantastic room of creative folks. And what I loved about that was kind of being in this physical space where I could sort of like have my writing work that I was doing, but I was also accessible to everybody who needed to talk to me, who I needed to work with. I could talk to facilities manager, I could talk to my art director, I could talk to our graphics folks, I could, direct a storyboard artist, all in the same building. So it kind of let me juggle, which is sort of one of my skills, is being able to just like jump quickly to different things and sort of shuffle through all the different creative stuff that we need to keep track of. So that was, I think the park itself was exciting, but the work and the people were the most exciting thing for me on that. And I just noticed that Vanita had commented as well, and she was one of the people that I met on that project. And so, hi, Vanita. So I think that would have to be my favorite project that I can talk about. My favorite project that I can't talk about was almost finished and almost ready to go. And the venue decided that we had gone through so much. We had auditioned, we had performers like kind of on standby, ready to go. We had drawings done, we had puppets getting built, we had this whole thing almost ready. And then the venue, who was also the venue, was the client, and they had sort of decided that wasn't going to fit into their operations. And they reduced it to almost nothing that was the same. And this whole project is just sort of sitting on a shelf somewhere. And I just keep hoping that one day somebody will find it and go, hey, this is all approved. We should just do this. So even if I don't get to be part of it, I just hope maybe it gets done sometime. Like, look at it, there's puppets. That's funny. We should use these puppets.
It has happened before, so fingers crossed it'll happen again.
Yeah.
Was there anything like creatively, specifically about your Bollywood project that you enjoyed?
Do you mean like as far as like what we were creating, or?
Yeah, like what you were actually working on.
I think I did like all the properties, so I was not a Bollywood expert by any stretch, but so it became like there was a lot of research on the front end of kind of like digging into some of these films, some of which were like real classics. Sholay is one of the films that I got to work a lot with, which is a film from the 70s that's sort of classic Indian cinema that's not necessarily considered a Bollywood film because there is singing in it, but it's not the same level of dance numbers generally. But so this was kind of the e-ticket of one of the areas we were working on. So it was really fun and exciting to kind of dig into something that is this classic property and try to figure out a way to turn it into a ride while still treating it, respectfully. The Stunt Show was probably my favorite just purely from a digging into creative stuff side of things. It was, I don't know if I have a picture of it. It's the building to the far right of the image we're looking at right now. It was for a property called Dabang, which is basically this really kind of high octane action about this cop who is just a total badass and goes and kicks ass all the time and everybody's afraid of him. And so we got to do a stunt show out of that. And like I got to work with Pat Milicano, who is Action Horizons, came in. He recently, I think, recently at the time, I don't know how recent it was, but had taken over kind of at Waterworld. And so I got to like sit down with him and we kind of worked through what we had laid out in the CG model for what the space was going to look like and actually like step through stunts and kind of like, oh, you know what, that feels not quite, that doesn't feel quite badass enough. He needs to be doing this, or moments when I kind of had a script laid out that Pat would say, this character kind of, even if she's not doing this specific thing right now, she needs to be kind of constant motion. And it was one of those things that then going and watching Waterworld after having talked to him and seeing like, this is exactly what he's talking about. It was really, really fun to sort of get a chance to dig in on something that I'd always wanted to. And I suddenly just now remembered that back in the day, one of my favorite things was there had been a Batman stunt show in the works for the Warner Brothers park. I don't know if that came to pass. I don't know what it was, but I remember being so excited about the idea of the stunt show that I had added some suggestions and like sketched my own little storyboards for it. And I'd forgotten entirely until this very second. I was like, oh, I've always wanted to do a stunt show. So one day I will get to do a stunt show that I get to see all the way through to production, but we didn't carry Bollywood parks all the way through to build. We got through design development and then handed it off. And I just hit my microphone because I'm not super used to it.
It happens. Since that was your first experience being a creative director, what challenges did you face that you weren't expecting to? I don't know. Honestly, that is a really good question. But I just have such positive memories of like what the work was that I think I was excited to meet whatever challenges there were. I think one of the things that I had to adjust to a little bit was how much direction, how many different people needed, and how it varied depending on the artist. So I remember I had a storyboard artist who kind of who wanted very, very, very specific everything kind of written out in extreme detail, and that is something that has kind of helped me in because I work in independent comics, so I'm a writer and I try to be very clear in my scripting of what I'm asking for, because I tend to be working with artists who have just so much drawings to do. They don't have the kind of time to like come back and forth with notes. It kind of wants to be this nail it the first time. But then at the same time, on this other token, there was I have this very distinct like memory of there was a time that I had planned to put a mood board, hadn't got to it yet. I had watched my art director like, okay, this is what I'm thinking for the one sign. And he was like, okay, got it. And then I hadn't talked to the graphic designer at all, but I happened to be passing by his desk, and he said, he flagged me down and said, I'm working on the, I don't remember if it was the Rustic Ravine sign or which
It wasn't a sign. It was for one of the Cholet graphic pieces inside. And he just flagged me down and waved me over to look at it. And it was so exact and so perfect without me having even spoken to him or written it out or done a single reference image and having it come secondhand. It was this moment of just like, I felt my eyes mist up a little bit. I was like, oh my God, you got right into, you got into my head and you knew exactly what I was thinking and then made it better, which obviously is what you expect of these incredible artists. But that was such a cool and interesting difference, just because I think it's really interesting to see how different people either, and I think it's just some people understand you better. Like you might kind of operate on a similar wavelength, and some people it becomes about like, okay, how do I have to manage my communication to make them understand what I'm saying so that we don't have to, again, I want to try and keep too much back and forth. I don't want to give an artist a vague instruction and then have them come back and be like, oh, that's wrong. And then tell them something else vague and make them kind of do these constant iterations. I never want that to be the case. So I think that was learning how best to communicate what I was thinking to let the artists get it as quickly as possible. I think that was a challenge that I enjoyed, and I feel like I have worked really hard to meet. But I think it's just a natural challenge of the position.
Would you say that you're really great at communicating to all sorts of different people now?
I hope so. That is my intent always. I try really hard to be as clear as possible and to sort of, because I mean, one of the things that sort of drew me to Parks was the variety of different artists and people you work with. And outside of just artists, obviously there are architects and there are master planners and, I think finding the ways that are both best for me to express what I'm thinking and for somebody to absorb what I'm thinking, it does feel like something that I've gotten pretty good at, and that I hope I can continue to bring to my work. But yeah, sorry, I got distracted because I looked at a question, but
it's okay. I can read that question off actually.
Sure.
So the question we have is, what advice do you have for people starting out in roles like concept art, graphic design, creative writing, etc., who want to build a career and eventually move up to a director type role?
Okay, I feel like there's a couple different parts of that. One of them is if you're sort of first starting out, and this sort of ties into actually my transition to comics, but because the advice I think all artists get, a piece of advice is like, just keep making art, keep drawing or keep writing, keep doing it. And that is very good advice. But the next step, I would say, for me personally, it's always been a little difficult to just like self-motivate when I don't have a project or somebody relying on like, this is a deadline that if I don't finish it, an artist is going to suffer for it. If it's just for me, I kind of tend to struggle with it. But several years ago, I joined a writers group. That was just a group of, it was storyboard artists and an editor for comics and me. And I do writing in my job as a creative director, but none of it is guest facing. It's all internal. So narratives and things like that. Even when I'm writing scripts for things, a lot of times, it is something that either gets really cut down or translated or changed, or that because I'm not necessarily carrying it all the way through to the end, it becomes, it just ends up becoming something different. So it's not necessarily my exact words, or there's not really somewhere where my name appears on it. But I sort of was like, I got to circle back to the writers group. That's where I was. So it was basically all people who we weren't writing novels, we weren't writing television shows, but we all sort of wanted to at least explore that. So we just kind of came together and we're working on stuff that was putting us into, it was putting our work in front of other people. So kind of like how I ended up in comics was that one of the women in that group is a comic book editor. And at a time I had been visiting with another friend of mine at that company, and I stopped by to say hi and was mentioning that I was sort of looking for ways to expand my creativity at the time. And she sort of looked at me and had this thought of like, oh, hey, well, one of our writers is actually leaving her book. It's her own property and she owns it, but she wants to move on, but we want to keep publishing the book. So we're testing new writers. If you want to submit some pages, I could put your name in because I think, from what I've read of your stuff, I think you could do this. So I think part of on that like early end was being able to get my work in front of somebody who was in a position to do something with it. But also like finding a way to hold myself accountable to making that work, finding ways to be networking in ways that are different from what, because I know like it's always good to have an event where you go in and just meet people, but at the same time, a lot of times where you have a networking event, people are a little exhausted. Sometimes there are things that are there's something that sometimes it's not my favorite way to network. I tend to become friends with a lot of the people I work with and then work with the people I've become friends with. Because that just tends to be how I end up finding work. So I try to, bring creativity to my friendships too. So I think that would be my suggestion for the front end is like, find ways to get your work in front of others that is outside of just a portfolio review. Just, and also when you're meeting people, try to think of them as like an interesting person that you just want to be friends with and talk to. Because like, if you're really focused on getting something out of them, that kind of comes across. And I think that's how networking can get exhausting. But a lot of times, if you just want to meet somebody cool, they're going to be naturally more interested in you if you're interested in them. And then, something can come out of that, of down the road, them being, I really am interested in your thoughts. In this conversation we're having, I'm interested. Do you have any work? So then it just becomes something where like your personality is what leads people to wanting to know you and wanting to work with you. There was a second half to that question that was about wanting to go in a like creative leadership kind of direction. Is that correct? The creative director? Yeah,
like having the goal of eventually becoming a director type role, but how to go about that when you're just starting off.
Tell people. I think that's one of the first things of like, it can be frustrating because there will definitely be times that you tell somebody what your goal is and what you want to do that they might not hear you and they might not give you the focus and attention that you want. But if you and if you don't know exactly what you want to do, which I didn't really, I think one of the things is, again, showing an interest in the jobs of the people that seem like the kind of job you might want. One of the first people I started sort of just following around when I started as a PA at Thinkwell was one of the art directors who was just, she was gregarious and was super interested in like, she wanted me to follow her around. So I learned a ton of stuff from her and she remembered me. And so I think that I keep seeing people I know popping up in the comments and I'm like, oh, Dave's here. Hi, Dave. Oh, Cynthia. Hello. Hi, guys. This is hard for ADD havers. What was I saying? Could you remind me? I just completely forgot.
It happens. You were talking about following around your art director.
Yes, it was Carol Wood. But there was I just wanted to know more about them and what their careers were. So I started trying to ask everybody about like, well, how did you get here? So an example being Dave Cobb, who was one of the people who I worked with on that first project, who was somebody he was one of those people who always knew he wanted to be in parks. And so he had a very direct route. But some of the other people I knew, one of my good friends who is still working in parks has an animation background and still also works in animation. And Carol Wood, who is the art director I mentioned, came from film. And it was really interesting to kind of just like let yourself be interested in the stories people have, because they're interesting stories. You're going to learn from them about kind of what their path was. But you're also, I think, you are showing yourself and the type of creative person you are by relating with people, I think. And then part of that is as you start to find out, like, hey, wow, Dave, I'm really interested in doing what you do. Who should I talk to? Like, what are some things you should do? And the different people who I've talked to over time, one of my good friends, Zane Yench, at a certain point, he was, I think, the first one who was just like, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to just write a treatment for this property. Go do it. Go away. Go on. Go do it. Which is not really how he talks, but it was he gave me an assignment, which he didn't have to do, and was very cool of him. But if you can be talking to people and like give yourself assignments like that are specific and not necessarily like, because the writing I had done in college was all like fiction writing. It wasn't scripts. It wasn't anything that really would translate super well to parks. But so I went and wrote a treatment, and he's like, okay, this is great. Go write this treatment now. And then I started to realize like, oh, I can assign these to myself, and started just like creating a portfolio for myself so that I was more confident in what I was writing. But also I had something to show to people, even though it was sort of more of it was like a spec script essentially, because it was for a property that nobody had hired me to do anything for, but it was a property that I knew and understood. And I'm like, oh, I can find the ways to, exploit this. And it made me realize how much I had learned about the industry and about the types of experiences that we are putting into theme parks. So yeah, talk to people, ask them about themselves, tell people what you want to be doing, and give yourself assignments, and also kind of ask people how they got to where they are, and just be open about it. Because I think that's one of the things that like, once people start to realize like, oh, you want to do what I do, let's talk about that more. And at a certain point, you're gonna eventually get into a position where you can potentially build on that. Because when I was hired at Riva, it was as a creative associate, not as a creative director, because they rarely hire you straight in as a creative director. But it was because it was for people and with people who I had worked on a ton of stuff with in capacities that weren't necessarily work. Like some of them I'd done projects with. I edited videos with, and I did puppet shows with, and it was stuff that was just fun things that were creative. So just like be creative with people and make friends. Be as friendly as you can and be nice to people and try to share creativity. Because I think most of us have that in common, that like we want to make stuff that's cool. So find out what people like about making stuff.
When it comes to doing your own personal projects and kind of doing things primarily for yourself, how do you typically approach that? Because I've heard the advice of targeting your weak spots especially with industries that are so, have so many moving parts, especially like themed entertainment where everything goes together. When it comes to making a project where it's only your one discipline as well. Those were kind of two questions, so sorry if I was confusing.
No, that's okay. I think I'll sort of start with the second half a little bit. So I'm going to talk a little bit about comics in here too. I know for a fact that if I had pursued comics when I first got out here in my early 20s, I would not have been able to meet the deadlines, and I would not have been able to complete that. Not because there's anything not because I'm a bad person, but because I have ADHD and didn't know how to manage it and had not learned any of the skills kind of necessary. And comics, at least at the level that I am at, they are collaborative, but on a much smaller scale, because you have a much smaller team. Sometimes it's a team of 3. You have a writer, an artist, and an editor. Sometimes it's a team of 1. You have somebody sometimes who is writing and drawing and editing their own stuff. So like the self-motivation side of that was something that I had learned over time. And I learned it by working in an industry that was much more collaborative, where I was needing to complete things for others. I was needing to complete stuff. So I think for me, the nature of putting myself in a position where my weaknesses, I had no choice but to work on my weaknesses. I had no choice but to do some of the stuff that I didn't really like to do. And it helped me also find what my strengths were. So, and I talk about the Bollywood Parks job a lot because it was one of the first places that I think I really realized what my strengths really are, which is communication and creative leadership, and finding ways to like, I'm not the one doing the art, but I am realizing that like, oh, I could see, because I was in this room with these people, like I could see the impact I was having on my lands and who I was working with. But at the same time, there was still stuff that I was struggling with. So one of the things that I personally do as much as possible is work with my producer or my editor, whoever my sort of project management counterpart is. I try to be really upfront about like, here are the things that I struggle with. Scheduling is always going to be hard for me because I have ADHD. This is how my brain is, but here are the things that I am working on to manage that. I've learned how to use calendars in a certain way. I've learned how to do this, but I am asking if you're able to help meet me halfway in these certain places. Could you send me this reminder? Like just to kind of being transparent with people in parks, and finding, I have worked with some really wonderful creative producers who are just fantastic collaborators. And that has been good. And then it also got me in a place where when I was actually like starting to pursue comics, I had some techniques in place. I had the kind of like, okay, I know I need to ask for this help. I know I need to use this type of calendar app to force myself to do stuff. I know that, and this is not something that's working right now because of pandemic, but like, I know that I work better on personal stuff. If I just go elsewhere, if I go anywhere else, I have to go to an office or to a coffee shop or somewhere. I just need to be somewhere where if it's like where other people can see me not working. So I can't just be in my house because people will see me not working. So that has been an interesting thing to moderate during the pandemic, but I've managed.
I love the weaponization of public guilt. That's a fantastic way to go about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
As we talked previously, you had mentioned that creative director and art director, depending on where you work, are kind of different roles. And I'd actually never heard that before. So maybe some people in our audience are very similar to me and are kind of unaware of exactly what those two positions do.
So I have noticed in working for, in my experience in the companies I've worked for, a lot of the companies tend to sort of follow either a Universal model or a Disney model. And that's a really, really high level kind of, it's reductive of each of these companies have their own very specific way of doing things. But a lot of the people who own the smaller companies in the industry worked at either Disney or Universal at a certain point. I tend to work at companies that sort of, at least from the creative director perspective, follow a more universal approach in that the creative director kind of holds and shepherds the vision for whether it's the attraction or the land or the park itself or all of the above, depending on the structure and how many creative directors there are, but that they're sort of the one who is championing the vision, and then in collaboration, very close collaboration with art directors, they're like, the art directors are the ones who are then enacting that vision and elevating it. And, but I kind of feel like it, and this, I don't know if this is the best way to say it. It's sort of like there is a part of a burden of design is taken off of the art director, but I also at the same time, like I am not an art director in any capacity, let alone a Disney art director, because at Disney, it tends to be that like the art directors kind of do the role of a creative director. So there are some people who are art directors at Disney who can be creative directors elsewhere, but just not necessarily doing the same amount of drawing. And again, like this is just from my limited perspective of having like talked to some of my friends who have been art directors at Disney, or art directors I've worked with in the past who have worked in the Disney system as well. It just, it seems like there is a difference there, and that there are art directors that can be creative directors And there are some creative directors like me who would really, really need to work hard on their painting skills to be able to be an art director in that same capacity, even though I think what they do is a lot of what I do as a creative director. It's interesting. And I know that was kind of a vague and confusing answer, but I think what I would say is if you meet somebody who is an art director or a creative director, ask them more about it. Just ask them more about like what they do. And you can use that like I heard some random lady say that there's a difference between art directors in sort of a Disney way and a Universal way. Is that your experience? Oh, tell me more about that. Just kind of that way it's an in, and you can, I always feel weird because I'm like, I don't want to tell people what art director's experience is because that's not my experience. But if it seems like that's the information that I've gotten.
So you'd previously touched on a little bit of the differences between working in comics and working in theme parks. What had actually been the main draw for you to going into comics?
Well, one thing that was great about it was the speed of turnaround. Had a meeting to discuss the first issue I was working on, and less than 6 months later, I think there was a book in my hands. So it was this kind of like, and there was a book where I could like show people, look, I wrote those words. See the words that this person is saying? I wrote them. Versus, one thing that I love and hate about my job is that it's kind of hard to explain. So I love it in that, and in a situation like this or at a party or something, I always have something to talk about. I can just explain my job, and usually people are interested in it because if it's not a party that is a bunch of theme park people, they're like, whoa, do people build theme parks? People just kind of forget that there's somebody who designs those things. That like outside of Imagineering, there are people who make those things happen. And so I there is just kind of, my job changes so much depending on what phase of production it is, depending on, because sometimes it's not theme parks, sometimes it is an event, or sometimes it's a different kind of immersive experience. But there is always something to talk about. And at first I was kind of like, oh, it'll be easy to show people that I write comic books and like, these are the words I wrote. But I've also found that like, and then that's all I have. Then I'm like, and that's it. Yep. I do that. Oh, I got to talk about my other job in order for this party to be fun. Let me tell you about my other job, because I can go on for 100 years.
You got to even it out sometimes,
Yeah.
So we have a few photos of you at Comic-Con.
Do you?
Yeah. Don't know where they came from, but would you like
probably.
To
I assume from my Instagram. I was bad, everybody. I'm going to tell you this because I was supposed to fill up this I was supposed to provide more images myself, and I didn't get to it, so I apologize. This was at New York Comic-Con a couple years ago, 2018, I think, and everybody got sick. So wear a mask if you're going to be going to any conventions at any time in the future. It's just a good idea. So yeah, this was an incredibly fun day because I got to be just like I got to be like a writer in residence almost at the Boom booth and just like hang out and wait for people I just talked to people as they passed by. I brought them over and tried to sell my first issue of Wonderland to them. That is my book. Goldie Vance is created by Hope Larson, and this is Wonderland. Wonderland is owned by me, and I invented it, and it's about a theme park where you walk through a door and there's a magical kingdom on the other side that's sort of like the theme park but magic. And I'm very proud of it. And it was a 4-issue miniseries that has been released as a trade paperback, which I have right here. Oh, there it is. But yes, that was a really, really fun time. That was my favorite time, I think, at a Comic-Con, like being a professional who was talking to people, was just being chill. Because I've done a couple panels and those are fun. But like just being able to kind of like sit and relax. And there wasn't a queue for me or anything. I was just there and I could kind of be like, I'm going to go get a sandwich. I'll be back in an hour. But it was super fun, and I got to meet. There's another job that I had briefly with Boom. There's an Italian writer named. Oh my God, I'm having a brain fart. I can't remember. Julian Macchione. Julian, I think. I'm terrible. He's amazing. He wrote his first American graphic novel, and they needed to basically kind of adapt it. So I did the adaptation for that. It was a really great piece. It's called Alice Through the Looking Glass. And so I got to actually meet him because he was the other like writer there. He was in from Italy. And so it was just really cool to like, oh, I'm going to hang out with you. And I've never met you before. And you're just a delight. So we became friends, and it was wonderful.
We actually have another question from the Slack as well,
Perfect.
Which is, what do you think themed experiences could learn from comic books or graphic novels in reference to narrative and storytelling?
Huh. That is a fascinating question. That I think, That's a really interesting question. I'm going to talk about like narrative and storytelling in themed experiences while I think about it as much as I can. Because that was something that I think actually learning to write narratives for themed experiences helped me also improve. And touching back on what you said earlier about like focusing on your weaknesses, one of my weaknesses as a writer was just knowing how to plot. And in comic books, like how you plot things is very important because you have a very specific number of pages. You want to limit the number of panels, and you have to get it across with an efficiency of art and of words, because the more words you have people saying, the more speech bubble takes up the art. So there's a lot of things you have to think about. But when you're writing a ride, you have a narrative that you're trying to get across in 3 minutes. You have a very limited amount of time, and sometimes you are trying to, you have an IP, so you're trying to highlight specific characters, and you're trying to get a story across that rather than distracts from the action of whatever your vehicle is doing, enhances it. So I guess something that I think that attraction design you could learn from comic books is less about the writing of the narrative and more about like creative ways to use fewer dimensions. One of the challenges that has come up on a couple of different occasions is that like sometimes you'll be designing something and then suddenly you might not always have control of the ride system. We had an attraction and a situation where the client had full control of ride system. So we were designing something based on with a layout and everything with one specific ride system, and the client decided that they could get this other untested ride system for cheaper. But we had the same footprint. Nothing could change outside, like none of the building could change. So we had to completely change the design, how we were designing things, because we no longer had any room for props or sets. So it became all about flats and graphics and trying to find dynamic, creative ways to make something still visually interesting and wonderful with an economy of space. And that is something that I didn't learn necessarily from comics at the time, certainly because I wasn't in comic books, but I always was interested in animation and comic books and a lot of like two-dimensional art forms. So we ended up leaning heavily on graphic design and travel posters and that kind of thing. So finding simplified but beautiful design and design that is tried and true, but sort of trying to find a new way to present it. I think that for me is like the first thing I can think of that is a way that you could take and learn something from comics and apply it to outside of like stuff to do with IP specific things.
Earlier, you mentioned that when you first graduated and didn't really know what you were going to do, where did comics and your like learned interest of them come initially? Was it like you were a fan of comics and then eventually you're like, wait, I can actually write for these? Or how did that process go? Since a lot of times for people in themed entertainment, people kind of fall into it. And it seems like you may have fallen into two different, very interesting careers.
Yeah. I think for me personally, I've always been sort of a river logic person, which is a term that I don't know where I learned it. It's not something that was like my grandma used to say, but the idea that sort of like that the river will take you where you need to go, and if you let the river, the river will guide your course, sort of. So I have always kind of followed the currents of where my life seems to be taking me. I'm like, oh, I have a lot of people in California. My life seems to be taking me to California. I didn't have a particular dream. I just knew kind of the sense of the sort of thing I wanted to do. I wanted to be making stuff. I wanted to feel like I didn't have to force myself to be working. Like I wanted to be doing things that started to make. Sometimes when there's this ADHD thing that like when you're doing things that you're not interested in, time almost feels like it slows down and stretches out, and it feels like torture kind of. So I wanted to try and find a thing. Like there are certain things in my life that I was learning about. I learned when I was in college that like, oh, when I'm editing video, because I took a couple of documentary classes, and I'm like, oh, when I'm editing video, time zips right by. It doesn't feel like it. I know I'm working, I'm aware of it, but it doesn't feel like this slog. So wanting to find things that were like that were like, oh, when I'm writing a story, I feel like time doesn't feel like it's slow, that there are these specific types of, like, there's a specific feeling that I'm looking for. And that I knew that I could find in a lot of places, but that it seemed like creative things seemed to give me that feeling the most. So it kind of became like, okay, and now where will we go with things? And I, like that sort of took me to theme parks. And the whole time that I'm, in theme parks, I'm still, heavily invested in films and television. And I've always been a superhero person. Like I like action and comedy, and I like things that are fun. So there's kind of this like also constantly consuming those things that you like and finding little ways to like to bring them into what you're actually working on, or whether you're working on something or if it's just conversations. If you're having, if you ever have those talks with your friends where you're like, oh, what if we did this? And you discuss a whole TV show that you never do anything with, but you had this discussion that is exercising your creative muscles a little bit. How did I get here? River logic, falling into different industries. And so I've always just sort of had a sense of like, I'll try anything. I'll try anything once and try and find the things that I'm good at in it. And so I tried theme parks and found that I could do. There was something in there that I was pretty good at. And then I tried comics and found that like, yeah, there are things in here that I'm pretty good at. And for me, having both of those wells to dip into is really good. It's really good to be able to just kind of like flex different creative muscles in different ways. I think trying to be open to the type of experience that's going to come to you, because if you want to be a creative director, that's probably not going to be the first job somebody gives you. You're probably going to get some very random other job, but like within that, look for the things about that job that do feel good. And if some other completely seemingly sideways opportunity comes up, it might feel right. It might feel like it has some of the, touchstones of what you're looking for in a creative director career. So maybe try that, because especially if you're looking to be a creative director, there are so many weirdo skills that are hard to quantify, that come invaluable in that career. So like anything that kind of gives you an opportunity to do what you feel good about and feel good at, you're going to find ways to incorporate that into creative direction later.
Can you think of any of those weird and unusual skills off the top of your head?
I mean, the video editing has come in handy just from standpoint of musicality. Sometimes I'll be able to just like throw a video together to sort of explain something. It has let me, when I've had ride attractions, do timing animatics more quickly, to be able to sort of like, even just for myself sometimes, because there's this element of rides that is timing that you have to, it gets polished over time to become this perfect thing to hit your THRC. But even from the beginning, I found I needed to sort of have a general sense of how long each sort of beat of an attraction was going to take, and being able to actually just like, okay, I can't just visualize this. I'm going to make it. I'll make a little animatic that just shows me. That was really helpful. And just, it was a tool that became very useful in just me working through my own creative process.
That actually leads perfectly into our final question from our new public Slack, which is, what does your writing or creative process look like?
Lately, I find that I almost always start just like building myself mood boards with writing in them. I'll build a keynote, just for me sometimes, where it's not designed. It's just like black slides and I drop pictures in, because that's for me the best way for me to get an idea across to the people I'm working with, but also to sort of solidify it myself. I'll just be dragging and dropping sometimes like really low quality reference images, but just to get the idea across of like what sort of design am I thinking of. And sometimes also it will help me of like, oh, that's not quite what I was thinking. This isn't exactly right. It helps me narrow down the vision that I have, because a lot of times the vision is just so kind of, it's nebulous, or it's the idea for a game. Like, okay, there's this game and that's the idea I have, but I need to, like, how does that game present itself visually? So that starts to, it becomes like just image searching constantly of anything. It's not usually rides or attractions. It's, okay, well, this game kind of reminds me of this other game that I played once in Jackbox, and that had like murder stuff to it, but it doesn't want to be too murdery. I'm thinking more of like Old Tiny Mansion, like Clue or something. So it becomes this, how do I jump from the initial thought to what the design wants to feel like, and then how do I start to narrow that down and get that idea across without being able to just like sketch it up. So a lot of times I also will be doing, sometimes the next stage is then like photo bashing, because I can Photoshop. That's another of the like skills that I picked up over time that is super useful, because it lets me find faster ways to send somebody a just diagrammatic image of like, this is what I mean, but good. You know, like, I mean this, except drawn by somebody who is an artist, you know? So then a lot of times, yeah, it's sort of Google image search, building the keynote. There's usually a lot of photo bashing, a lot of little doodles that I have to usually send to an artist and say, can you do a doodle of this that makes more sense? That like, do you understand what I mean when I say this? In ideal situations, when I have a tech team or a tech director, when we're starting to get like more involved in like the magic tricks that we're going to be using, it becomes this, okay, I have this idea that maybe is totally crazy and stupid, but does this or something like it sound like something that has been done before that you think is possible? Yes or no? If no, okay, what about this? Then it becomes like the back and forth of like starting to alter down the ideas of like, or change the direction of them enough that it becomes something that is actually doable, because I don't have the same catalog of every single thing that has been done ever, which is why one of the things that I love about the industry and being a creative director is that you get to work with this team of experts. So I don't have to be an expert. I don't have to be the budget expert, because I have a budget expert that I work with. And I don't have to be the tech expert, because I have tech experts that I work with. But I know enough about what's going to cost too much. And I know enough about what's going to be completely ridiculous and impossible to start to direct what the discussion is. And then I get to have that discussion, which I really enjoy. I love the problem solving of that, of working with people. So yeah, did that answer the question?
I believe so.
I forgot it. Like I got to the end and I'm like, oh, what was I talking about?
I just got so captivated in your story. So I was like, wait, there was a question? But
Thank you.
I hope whoever asked that, I hope that works out. I guess I can do a follow-up just in case that wasn't sufficient. How about going through, other than photo bashing, when you're actually coming up with your ideas, what does that look like in your brain specifically?
I guess it kind of depends. It depends on the how the project is sort of starting out. It depends on if we've had like, is it a big charrette? How big is the project? A lot of times I need to sort of start to construct the box of what the project is. So I'll start to be asking the questions of like, yeah, can I get a sense of like how give me a building to compare this to? Because you could tell me square footage, but I'm like, that's not, I don't have square footage numbers in my head. Like, is it an IKEA or is it a, is it a Hardee's? I don't know. I'm from the Midwest. We call Carl's Jr.'s Hardee's out there. But and then it starts to become like, okay, what could fit into this space? What is something that I've been thinking about a lot on a project that I'm working on right now that I can't talk about, but is the what are the drivers throughout the space? So for a theme park, your drivers are your attractions. And so your e-tickets are your big drivers. And then as, the rides get smaller down to flat rides, they're smaller drivers, but they're still, things that people can do that are part of the overall experience, that drive people throughout the spaces. And then everything from area development to like RD&E, all of that, all of the streetmosphere, any of that stuff is sort of gravy. So as long as if you have strong drivers in place that get people throughout the space and allow them to feel like they have gotten their money's worth of the experience as a guest, like I feel like I've done enough rides, then every single other little thing is just great. Like, oh, this is so cool. Like, oh, I got to have this Dole Whip had googly eyes. I don't know. I can't just whip something out of thin air, but like any other piece of gamification or show is gravy. So I think it's sort of that, what are the drivers? If we're designing an FEC, all right, how do we keep this from just being a box with stuff in it? The stuff needs to be, okay, this is something that people will want to come over and do, and it will move a couple of people through this space. Oh, there's probably going to be a line there. So there has to be a couple of things nearby that aren't the same level of engaging, but are engaging enough that you don't have to just stand there and feel like there's nothing else for you to do. So I feel like for me, that is where I start to break down an experience of like, okay, if people have to wait for something, what is there for them to do? And are they going to be mad? Are they going to get mad about it? They need to have something cool to do, or they're going to get mad about it.
Awesome. Well, if anyone watching currently has any questions or wants any advice from Jackie, please feel free to put them in the comments and we can ask them during the end of this stream. But we'll move on to a slightly different topic as those questions are rolling in. Mm-hmm. So you talked about your process while you're working on a themed entertainment project. Are there a lot of similarities for your creative projects with comics?
Yes. From a sort of communicating with the artist standpoint, I will usually start to put together like a keynote or a Google Slides that is like, okay, this is a new character and this is some of the like vibe that I'm thinking of them having. So just some clothing reference and things like that. For Wonderland, it was a lot of park reference. Excuse me. But when it comes to, I think there is definitely a similarity to like how I do a narrative for an attraction and how I will initially beat out a comic script because again, like there's a timing thing that they do have in common a little bit, that there is some amount of precision that you need, and you need to figure things out with an economy. You need to get the essence of what the ride needs or what the book needs. You need to get it on paper with as much economy of words as possible first, and then like so that you don't have to be like nickel and diming something that's way too long and then you're going to lose something really important. So beatments, I think, definitely are really valuable for me in both places. But just kind of depending on the phase for parks and experience design, it's very different. Like there are, you know, the project I'm working on now, there is not really anything that requires me to figure out timing. So that's like has nothing to do with some of the comic stuff that I do. But when it is something that has more of like a timed narrative to it, there's definitely similarities to figuring out the bones, kind of figuring out what the plot wants to be, so that we can get it as quickly as possible. And then everything else becomes like filling in the spaces. You're creating the depth around it, but you need to have a strong skeleton or your ride's going to feel incomplete, or you're not going to get to the kind of chapter ending you need to get to by the end of a comic issue.
Okay. So sorry, I'm just checking if we have any comments or questions coming in.
No worries.
We'll give everyone a couple more minutes. So as a person that works in themed entertainment, when you see new or themed experiences that are new to you, what do you find the most exciting within them? Whether it's like something you haven't seen before or like a certain trope, or if they use something that you may have used in a previous project, but in a new way.
Yeah, I think I always get excited when I see something that I get most excited when it's something that has been around forever, but has been used in a way that I haven't seen before. And I think I talked a little bit about, I'm just going to talk about an experience that I went to and adored. That was a husband and wife company called Mr. and Mischief put together an experience called Escape from Godot. And it is it's not a Waiting for Godot escape room, but it is kind of. So you arrive at a tiny, tiny little theater in Silver Lake was where I experienced this. And you're brought inside and there are, I think, 8 to 10 of you. And the usher comes in a panic and tells you, oh my God, our stage manager's quit. We need you to help us find the stage manager's binder, put it together, and then call out lighting cues. Okay, get in there. So you go into this theater and there are 2 actors on stage performing Waiting for Godot, but they're stuck in a scene until you find the puzzle pieces, solve that puzzle, and then call out the correct lighting cue. And then a light changes and the actors are allowed to proceed. And that is, there are several stages of that throughout. There was nothing in that experience that was like some kind of new technology. It was theater lights. It was actors. It was little props with puzzles on them. There's literally a combination lock at one point. None of it is, they didn't invent anything, but they worked out this incredible, the way that they put this together to create something that is completely new, and not like anything I had ever experienced before, combining all of these different, different small pieces of different types of entertainment, to create something just completely refreshing. And it was so much fun. And I think that they did it for LA Fringe, and then it was briefly a couple years ago up in Silver Lake. But that was one of the things that I was most excited about. It's that seeing when somebody has taken a piece of technology or a trick or taken anything that you're used to, a crossword puzzle, I don't know, and finding ways to create an experience around it, or to incorporate it into an experience that is different from how you would find that thing in the real world or in a magic show. That just always gets me really fired up.
Well, it seems like we'll be wrapping up the show pretty soon. So do you have any final thoughts or advice for the audience?
Oh no, it's too open-ended. Do you have anything more specific, Kelsey?
Well,
now the pressure's on you. Haha.
Thanks. So with everything being kind of torn down and built back up again within themed entertainment. A lot of things definitely are going to change, but since you did graduate in a very similar time to right now, other than following what you're interested in and all of the other great advice that you've given so far about like learning from everyone and becoming friends with other people, is there any advice that you would give people personally that are going through such an unstable time and want to go into such a kind of currently unstable career field?
Mm-hmm. I think if it's something that you really care about and find that when you get chances to do it, you really enjoy it, try and stick it out in whatever way you can. After in 2009, I spent some time working as a receptionist at a video encoding company, which didn't have anything to do with parks. It was just a job that I could get. But I was where I wanted to be, and I was still around people that I liked and still around people who liked theme parks. It was a time when Disney tickets were not as expensive again. So like we were able to go and consume theme parks too, which is good. Like, I think being able to be somewhere that you're happy is a big part of like getting through a rough time. So even if you can't get the dream job that you want right now, that doesn't mean that what you're doing can't like be leading you in that direction. So kind of, I think, be open to other opportunities and find ways that like, does this job play into things that that I'm gonna want to do. That encoding job, I ended up getting a job at a theme or at a registered projection company out of that was a coordinator job and they do specifically parks and museums. So again, I wasn't specifically interested in registered projection, but I was working for a company that did Disney shows. So I was finding the ways to be closer. And while you're doing that, finding the things within the jobs that you can get that feel like they're helping you as a person be the type of creative person you want to be. Because then when an opportunity does come along, you'll be ready to learn everything you can from it as quickly as you can. I think just that kind of taking a little bit of the river logic of like, okay, I graduated at this time and it's a terrible time to have graduated and I'm very sorry. It's rough, but it's where you are. And if this is something that feels like where you need to be, find the ways to stay near it until it's in a place that you can find something to get into, I think. And I hope that was a, what's the word? Coherent. I hope that was a coherent answer.
Thank you for all the advice that you've given throughout this entire show. I feel like a lot of people are going to find everything you said was very helpful, especially for people that are starting off like me.
I hope so. I hope to be helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. Yes.
Sorry, no, I just thought this was something that I talked to you about when we talked a little bit before, but like, also just, talk to the people who have been in this industry before for a period of time. Like I have found, this is something that I said to you that I want to say here, is that I have found that the people I have worked with in this industry tend to be extremely generous with their time and pleased to support people wanting to get into the industry. So even if there is a long road to hoe in front of you, there are people who want to help answer questions and just have conversations with you too. So I think just, reach out to the people who are out there and see if you can't find yourself some mentors. I found a mentor who's just a couple years older than me, but it was huge. Just keep talking to people, and if you love parks, keep loving parks. And if you start to love them less, then maybe look into other stuff and see if there's something else that you are loving as much. So just don't force yourself to love something that you don't love anymore.
Thank you. And coming from someone who jumped into themed entertainment basically when lockdown began, and I just logged into one of the TEA Zoom meetings, not knowing anyone, being like, we'll see how this goes. Sometimes that's kind of how it goes, and it can end up in great places. Every single person I've met in themed entertainment has been like the most generous, creative, and interesting person to talk to. I haven't been turned away from anyone, luckily. So if anyone watching this has a fear of networking or initially reaching out, like, do it. It's great.
Yeah, reach out, talk to us. We're pretty cool. We're all right, I guess.
Yeah, we're fine. If you made it this far into this video, maybe they like us just a little bit.
They probably think we're pretty okay. I hope. Maybe they're just there being mean. Saying
Maybe.
Stuff.
Hate watching is still an acceptable practice.
I guess that's true.
According to us. Well, thanks again for joining us today and giving us so much of your time and wisdom.
So wise.
And everyone that is part of TETV would love to see you on our new Slack channel, and definitely make sure to catch our episode of Getting Real and Unsung Heroes, both happening this week. And please make sure to like and subscribe and check out all of our different social media channels, and we'd love to see you all there. And also, if you're having a little trouble finding each of those channels, make sure to check out our website. You'll find everything there. Yeah, thanks again, Jackie, for being here.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much, Kelsey. It's always good to chat with you.
Likewise. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.